Speaking of idiots, speaking of stupidity, well, I cannot believe, ladies and gentlemen, that there were no shots fired and nobody was hurt or injured in this McCloskey thing. If you don't remember what I'm talking about, there was a Black Lives Matter protest. Some Black Lives Matter people, as JD said, around 200 to 300. I don't know how many people were there, but the point is, they put down a barrier, on private property. It wasn't the McCloskey's private property. It was the property itself.
The street.
The
entire street was private.
So let me give people a little bit of background. So these Black Lives Matter protesters, they put down this barrier. And by the way, I've said since square one that they shouldn't have been there.
It was an iron fence, Brian.
I understand.
Okay.
I've said it a million times. They shouldn't have been there. It's private property. They shouldn't have been there. But on the other side of things, nobody was trying to get inside the McCloskey's home. There's no evidence of that. And they weren't on the McCloskey's private property. So what do the McCloskey's decide to do? They walk outside their expensive home. The McCloskey's look like they are two people that have never handled a weapon before, especially the wife. And they don't just go out there with guns. They point it at some of the protesters.
They asked them to leave first. Multiple times, the protesters refused. And there was obscenities that were being shouted by the protesters.
I haven't heard any of that.
Okay,
There's no evidence of that. That's what the McCloskey's are saying. And by the way, Mr. McCloskey also said that
lawyer.
there were the guy that was out there with the gun, he happens to be a lawyer.
Yeah.
They were going up the stairs to my house. They were trying to get in my house. And then when an interview on CNN with Cuomo challenged him on that and said, well, you live in a multi-million-dollar home. Do you have security? Yes, I do have security. Do you have any evidence? You could have heard a pin drop. He wouldn't answer the question. So the point I'm trying to make is this. There is an investigation that is still ongoing. Zero evidence that any of these protesters, which they shouldn't have been there, I agree with, no evidence of them actually trying to break into the McCloskey household. Zero evidence to support that.
The issue is that, and McCloskey stated this in the interview with Cuomo as well, you had the other protests that took place in St. Louis that resulted in the death of 77-year-old David Dorn. Their house is a $1.1 million house. It's listed on the National Historic Registry. I mean, it's considered a national monument.
To me, that has nothing to do with...
It's protected by the act that the president discussed a couple weeks ago. So they were thinking to themselves, wow, if this group, if this mob, if you will, this 200 to 300 person group / mob does decide,
which they didn't,
but you don't know that they weren't going to if they didn't go out. They were there to protest in front of the mayor's home.
Right.
They broke through an iron fence, went to a private street, and had no problem doing that. And then protesting. Their goal was to protest in front of the neighbor's home. Okay. The McCloskey's pulled out their weapons. I understand. One was an AR-15, one was a pistol. The AR-15 was just taken away from them. I get that. And Kim Gardner, the DA of St. Louis, is the one that started everything. But you don't, based on what had happened with other protests, with the looting and the rioting and the violence and the destruction of property, how can you really blame the McCloskey's for wanting to protect their particular home, which again what was over $1 million and listed in the National Historic Registry?
So first of all, the fact that it is in the Historic Registry, or it could be a home that's worth $25,000, that is completely academic, in my opinion, to this conversation.
Well, no, because
let me finish.
You have to work very hard to put yourself in a position.
It doesn't matter
to own a home like that.
But that is academic to the law. It doesn't matter whether this home is worth $25 million or $25,000. The fact of the matter is this. If people were trying to break into the home, whether it's a mansion or a piece of crap apartment like I live in, it doesn't matter. What matters is you don't point your weapon at people unless you feel like your life is in danger. And nothing I saw would lead me to believe that their life was in danger. Oh, yeah, and by the way, they didn't call the police, and nobody tried to enter their home. And if somebody in that Black Lives Matter protest had a gun, things could have gotten very, very bad. Now, there is a reason why there's an investigation, and there is a reason why that AR-15 was confiscated, because their behavior was not appropriate. Now, listen, if they walked out there armed and they didn't point the weapons at anybody, then I probably would feel a little bit differently. The mistake that they made was picking up their weapon and pointing it at the protesters. Yes, the protesters shouldn't be there, but that doesn't mean that somebody in their home could just walk out in their front yard and point it at people. I would feel in danger. Now, yes, I wouldn't have been there because I wouldn't have trespassed and gone on private property. But those two who did what they did, they lied. The husband is a liar, and the reason why they lied is he claimed that they were trying to get into their home. Not one witness, and there's no video surveillance or evidence. And they were asked, wait a second, this home is worth blah, blah amount of money. It's a very expensive home. You guys have security, right? Yes, we have security. So are you willing to say that on any of your security camera footage that anybody was trying to break into your home? No, there's no evidence of that. So he's a liar. Now, if you're scared, the first thing I do is call 911. They didn't do that. They didn't call the police. They decided to take matters into their own hands and walk in the front yard
Brian,
and point weapons at people. You think that behavior is okay?
The narrative of deep. Well, when you have a group of 200 or 300 people outside your home and you've seen, we'll call them Black Lives Matter protesters, Antifa, whatever you want to call them, and social justice warriors, if you will, protesters. You've seen what those groups have done before.
That has nothing to do with this case. No, it's a case-by-case basis.
The amount of destruction that has been done.
That has nothing to do with this.
And the assumption is, wow, this could happen to me in my home.
You can't make that assumption.
No, Brian,
it's a stupid assumption.
No, if there's 200 to 300 people that have no problem breaking through an iron wrought fence.
But they didn't go onto your private property.
But again, but the fact that they have no problem trespassing, why would you not be scared for your life under those circumstances?
There is a difference.
I certainly
I'll answer
would.
that.
I most certainly
I'll
would.
answer that.
And when you're outnumbered like that, by
I'll answer
almost
that.
200, how are you supposed to react? And then the conversation about defunding the police. How can you defund the police, but at the same time take weapons away from people
Not talking about
that are trying to protect their own property that they worked very hard for?
All right, so defunding the police is a completely different subject. I'm not going to get into that.
I'm saying it's all connected.
Okay, it's not connected to this specific case, but because if they called 911, the police would have arrived. There are police officers in that precinct, and they would have gone out there. So that's why it has nothing to do with this case. Hold on, let me finish. As far as the trespassing goes, there is a fine line between people trespassing on private property and people trespassing on your private property. Those are two completely different things. Yes, if they were on your private property, I would 150% agree with you, and I would 150% agree with the McCloskey's. They were not on their private property. Now listen, the McCloskey's could have done a lot of different things. They could have called the police. They could have had their guns ready in their homes. They could have even stepped outside with their guns and not pointed it at people. That is where they made the mistake, and that is exactly why a search warrant was executed on Friday evening at the Central West End of Mark and Patricia McCloskey. Their attorney has confirmed that. As I mentioned earlier, they confiscated some guns, and when the attorney was asked if anything else was seized from the home, he would not answer. That leads me to believe that there is a good possibility that something else was seized possibly from the home as well. Maybe laptops, maybe some other stuff.
No, they couldn't find the other gun. That's all there was to it. And actually, McCloskey was just gifted another AR-15 and ammunition today.
Okay, but the point
from somebody,
okay,
just from,
well,
just
I
from
don't care
somebody
about
else.
I don't care about that. But I'm just saying that the attorney was asked, was anything else taken from the home, and he wouldn't answer that question. If nothing else was taken from the home, it would have been serving his clients best to say, yeah, they didn't take anything else. It leads me to believe that they are investigating these two, and we'll have to wait and see what happens.